Hi, I'm Vanessa, and today I am working on my youngest son is a senior, his t-shirt quilt. It's a memory quilt that we do for um, that I do for my children when they graduate high school. It might have different t-shirts from school events, athletic events, so forth. Some of it's not just t-shirts, some of it's this silky sports jersey stuff. I think I've got some Cub Scout neckerchiefs in there, so forth. It's already sandwiched and quilted. Sandwiched and pinned with batting. I just used the Warm and White, I think it's called, Buy It by the Roll with Joann's. Just quilting cotton on the back. And I'm going to do an all over meander. I'm going to quilt this on my home machine, a Juki TL 2010Q. Love this machine. It's a straight stitch machine designed for quilting. I'll show it to you in a little bit. But it is great to, it's a dream to quilt on. This quilt's, I know it's over 70 inches, like 72, 76 inches, and so forth. So it's a fairly large quilt. I've done queen size quilts easily on this home machine. Don't have to have a long arm for a large quilt. If you're willing to put in a little bit of muscle. If you have shoulder problem, elbow problem, yeah, that could, it may be tougher, but I'm still kind of young and thankfully have my health. If you're like me, you can do it on a home machine. You don't have to have a long arm, regardless of what all the quilting groups and so forth you'll hear. Just a little bit about the construction. I like to do this collage effect rather than framing individual shirts in uniform sashed squares. Usually what I will do is, like, these are like the little pocket designs. I keep them in multiples where they'll all fit together in the end. So the little pocket designs I cut 5.5 inch to finish at 5 inches. This is a 10.5 inch square to finish at 10 inches. These larger squares were 15.5. So, and then I also even have some rectangular squares. Let me find one. Like these. These are 10.5 tall, but 15.5. So see, they may even go across, like these first couple of rows I worked in different units and then pieced them. So if you use something regular like that, it helps, and then you can lay it out, play with it, see how it all comes together. Basically that was my loose plan. If you have limited number of shirts or so forth, or a specific size you're trying to achieve, then you may want to actually draw it out and plan a little bit more thoroughly. I knew mine would fit together, and then I just laid it out, and where I had a hole, I went and found another shirt. So I'm not the most scientific of quilters. Let's talk a little bit about stabilization. I use a little fusible palon. I get the lightest weight I can find. Usually the more see-through the better. It's got a shiny side. The shiny side irons to the back of the fabric. So what I'll do is, like for the t-shirts, I'll cut them up the side seam and under the arm and lay them flat, like, and then maybe cut across here, or just, lay the top and bottom flat. I'll figure out my design, lay my square ruler on top. This one would probably easily have been a 10.5 inch square shirt, since that's about a 9 inch design. But I would test take and put my clear ruler on top, figure out where the square would be cut, put some pins at the corners so I can see it on the back side. I usually run a pin this way and a pin that way. at the corners. So then I'll turn over the t-shirt. If I'm doing a 10.5 inch square, then I'll do about an 11 or 11.5 inch square of Paylon. Don't like to waste a lot of it, so usually I only give myself about a 1/2 inch extra. Fuse it onto the back of the shirt, and then I bring it back to my cutting table and cut out the square. One thing you want to be careful with, I mentioned I use some of those silky soccer jerseys, or if a lot of t-shirts have these. This is a heat transfer vinyl, meaning too hot of an iron will melt those things. So when I'm ironing, fusing to the back of a vinyl design t-shirt or a silky design soccer jersey, I take a piece of my quilting cotton or a pillowcase or something and lay over the top, and I turn my heat down. Don't do it on high heat like you do with your cotton quilting and ironing and so forth. So that's just some tips. You don't want to melt your memento shirts. So I'm gonna get my machine set up and ready, get my camera re-angled, and so forth, and I'm gonna take you through just how to quilt this larger quilt on the machine, sit down machine, and I'll be right back. Okay, I've set up the quilt on the machine. Big points here: scrunch, don't roll, because when you roll it just makes it tight. It takes up more bulk in your throat space, right? When you can takes away from your maneuverability to be able to push the quilt about. You want as much of the weight up on the table at all times. You never want the weight, that needle feeling the weight hang off the table. So always be cognizant. When you're stitching on the 2010Q, this one has a side bobbin. It goes in this way on this side. So when I'm quilting, I'm gonna be careful not to pull too far in this direction, because I can pull that thread away from the bobbin and cause skip stitches. So I want to try to keep my movements that way, somewhat smaller, rotate my work, if you will. Presser foot pressure all the way up, stitch length to 0, feed dogs are dropped. I went ahead and pulled the bobbin thread up, and what I'll do is I'll leave that there, and then later on I'll tie knot real kind of close to the fabric. I'll thread a hand needle on there, and then I'll pop that knot in between the layers and bury the threads. But I wait and I do those last. You want to go slower around curves. It gets, when you get kind of in that bind or whatever, you don't want to rush, because you'll make your stitches long, because you control the length of your stitches. So you kind of want to work on a machine that you have a rhythm with. I piece on this machine so I hear it and I see the needle all the time, and that gives me that sense of rhythm. So I know how fast my hands need to move with the fabric. I'm just going to start with an all over meander, and I'll work in quadrants. I'll kind of work up that way and kind of over and work towards that top left corner, and then I'll make my way down, work towards the bottom right, or top right corner, bottom right corner, bottom left corner, and I'll work my way around kind of in a clockwise, kind of do loose quadrants. It's my meanders are rather large, and I just try not to cross myself. It just takes practice, and you can't be too OCD about being super regular. So you notice my needle ain't going too fast. I'm taking it nice and slow because I've got to get the rhythm. I just started. As I get more comfortable, I may go faster. And it's okay to stop. One thing I like about this machine is it stops with the needle down. But I'll just meander around. Got a little speedy there. I'm taking it nice and slow because I want my stitches to be even. And I haven't stitched in quite a while. Free motion, that is. Notice when I do speed up my foot, I try to keep my hands in rhythm. I stop often to make sure that the weight's up off the needle. I don't want this weight coming. But I'm just going to kind of keep, like I kind of went up here and meandered around, and I'll kind of work my way up here, and I'll just keep kind of just making a path, like a nice comfortable wide path towards, I'll get about from the middle to halfway to the edge and work that in blocks up, and then I'll come back down the other half, and then I'll come all the way down the corner about half that length or a quarter of the quilt, and then up towards the center, and then I'll do down and then up and then up and then make my way back to the middle. So that's how I work it, and I'll make sure that I don't run over my tails, my thread tails, because I'm gonna knot those and bury them later with a hand needle. Also, when I'm moving around, I use these pins. These pins are the devil if you're not watching what you're doing, and you get your foot caught up in them. Which I kind of, once I get everything flat, and I make sure that from time to time that I feel up under without my gloves on, and make sure that I don't have wrinkles under the bottom. But if you're taking it slow and you got it nice and flat and you keep the weight off, you're probably not going to get wrinkles. Especially if you kept it good and flat when you sandwiched your quilt. I take mine in. I have a laminate floor in the other room with a big open space. I get on the floor. I'm still able to do that. But I painter's tape my back right side down. So there's no wrinkles. Then I lay my batting over, and then I lay my top over and I pin it. That's just how I do mine. It's I leave about 4 to 6 inches around the side, between 4 and 6 inches around the side, just to give me some wiggle room. And after it's done, I'll go back in the floor. I take my cutting mat, my big cutting mat in there, and a square ruler, and I square it up and trim it. And then the edges wind up going to my scrap bin, or used for borders or so forth for other projects. And the batting trimmings I like to cut in 2.5 inch strips and make the jelly roll rugs with. Or I use them in smaller projects like embroidery, in the hoop stuff projects. So that's all I have for now. I'm gonna get off here and I'm gonna finish quilting my quilt. Okay, I showed the t-shirt quilt I was making on, and it is finished. I failed to make a video on how to bind, so I'll do the binding. I was looking at that video debating on whether I should even post it because I looked horrible that day, guys. But oh well, I don't dress up to go in my sewing room. Newsflash. So here is the completed quilt. So I'm gonna try to bring it up a little closer. All right, so I ended up picking a navy blue thread, did an all over meander design, and you know, I just don't do any, I don't worry about the design and have to go around designs and stuff, because when you do an all over meander, it doesn't really, the quilting don't show up. It disappears in the design, depending on your color choices. My favorite colors, like if I'm doing something real dark and vibrant like this, I'll try to get like, this had like a lot of dark blues in it, so I picked a dark blue. A lot of times I'll use a light gray, like this. I use these Coats and Clark. I mean, they're not very expensive. I get them at Walmart, but it's good thread. So I like it, and there's a lot of it on the spools. To kind of give you a sense of the back, you can see the quilting. It's not as regular as, say, some of the little templates you buy. That's just a wrinkle from where my son was laying on it. It's not stitched wrinkled, it's just a wrinkled quilt right now. Binding, I just picked the one solid color that I happen to have in my stash. And typically binding starts out as a 2 1/4 inch strip. So I do these 2 1/4 inch strips, fold them in half and press them. Of course, I'll do a binding tutorial one day. I joined them like so, and that's by sewing them perpendicular. Sew them on the diagonal, trim off the tail, and that's what kind of does that little bias join. And I machine attach my binding. So I put the folded edge to the inside of the quilt, the raw edge towards the outside edge of the quilt, the quilted quilt, and I stitch my 1/4 inch along the side. Then I flip it over to the back, and I choose to hand tack, and my stitches are pretty small, pretty invisible. I'll have to do a tutorial on that too. But when I flip that edge over, that's the folded edge there, because the raw edges ended up in the seam allowance under there. And I hand stitched all the way around. I also do embroidery, and certain quilts, if they have some sort of significance, like this one being a high school graduation, I like to put a tag. So I embroidered my son's name and his school, class of 21, on the tag. But anyhow, that's the finished product. It's a pretty heavy quilt. These are heavier than most of your quilting cotton quilts. They tend to be a little heavier because of all that jersey knit fabric in there and all the designs and so forth. But the kids love them. They're nice and cuddly. And that's all I have for now.